What is happening, you guys? Welcome back to the Let's Go Win podcast. And this show is all about helping you be happy, healthy, and wealthy. And the subject matter we're going to talk about today, I think everyone can certainly relate to, because we're going to be dealing with some trauma. We're going to start talking about some of these patterns that we've all had, whether we recognize them or we don't. We have an expert today that's going to share. She wrote an amazing book. She has become a field expert on this, and I just think it's something that everyone can be helped on. Annette Copeland is a licensed naturopathic doctor and author of Dragonfly Into the Light. She advocates for raising awareness about trauma and emotional abuse and combines awareness with solutions to break repetitive cycles and generational patterns. She emphasizes the importance of recognizing behaviors that cause these patterns and encourages emotional self-regulation. Her goal is to help individuals recognize and release behaviors from past experiences to create a fulfilling life of peace. Annette, welcome to the show. I'm so happy you're here.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
So I love the last part of that. To release behaviors from past experiences to create a fulfilling life of peace. I don't know anyone that's like, I don't want peace. Everyone wants it. And yet we have challenges that have, whether we're fully aware of it, things that we may not even be aware, right, that are sitting in that subconscious. And I'm guessing that's kind of where you said, you know what, enough. There's some real solutions here. Let's talk about it. Let's work on it. Let's get rid of some of this goo and stuff that's very real so we can really live our best lives. Was that the idea?
Yes, absolutely. And, even like with today's culture, we have the cancel culture, for everything. And it's so common for people to be triggered. I'm triggered. And when they say they're triggered about something, it usually means they're getting ready to say, and it's your fault. So I think that as human beings, we need to start taking responsibility for our own triggers and look at them as an opportunity for growth and learning about ourselves, instead of always saying, you hurt me, it's your fault. Well, I perceived that one way. It may not have been intended to be that way. So our perception forms our thoughts and our actions. So how can we change our perception to modify our behaviors so that we are living a more fulfilling life, and we get rid of that blame game? And we shouldn't blame ourselves either. Like, get rid of it altogether.
Yeah, one of the trainings that I've done for years is victim versus responsible. Some people say victim and being a victor. And what I heard in that is, look, this event happened, there's some nasty stuff that happens to human beings. And it's not to discredit that. And I'm talking the worst of the worst. I mean, a woman being raped, a child being molested. I mean, there's some nasty shit that happens. And I'm not saying to take responsibility for that. Right. However, to take responsibility for your life, not let that action define you. That's what I heard in that. Is that kind of the idea, Annette? Because I want to make sure I'm hitting the mark, and I want to make sure that the audience is hearing it appropriately.
Yes, I'm 100%. I think, yes, horrible things happen to good people, but if we let that horrible event happen, that happened, create how we react to everything for the rest of our lives, then we're doing ourselves a disservice. Unfortunately, bad things happen. And I've had a lot of people say, well, are you saying I deserved for this to happen to me? Absolutely not. You can't control what someone else does, but you can control how you act from that moment on.
Yeah. And I know one of the things that people will do is mask some of this pain, diving into whether it be drugs, alcohol, social media, name something that, where you're really just, I'm doing something not to deal with issue. I am, whether they're aware of it or not. That's the other fascinating thing. And maybe that's my first question is, how do you become aware that, okay, I'm not living my best life. I am absolutely abusing something, whether it be a drug or an alcohol or again, the phone. I mean, something where this is unhealthy, this pattern of behavior. How do they recognize it, Annette, if they're not quite aware of what happened? If let's say it was before they were 3 or 4, before they had the long-term memory, do you have some ideas on how to really find that so we can deal with it?
Well, those sort of things can show up in adults in a lot of different ways. A lot of people will identify as being an empath because they are super aware of how other people feel. You can also be an overachiever, like somebody who works and works and works and works, somebody who stays busy all the time and never takes any downtime. Those are all avoidance techniques, and they're just as toxic as swiping Tinder 24/7 or, staring at your computer all day long and doing busy work when you're never really getting anything done, or falling into a bottle. Those are all avoidance techniques to keep yourself from facing those things that are there, but you just can't quite put your finger on them. You're just avoiding it.
Yeah, you said the word empath, and this is such a fascinating idea because there are people that have abilities,
Mhm.
intuition, skills. It's one of those things I believe in. I actually, Heather is my, I don't even know, I call her my energy healer, my spiritual guide. And yet she has an ability to see things I don't understand. And the work that you're in, being a licensed naturopathic doctor, I'm really fascinated to hear your take on this because we've experienced perhaps a traumatic event. We have opened up something. I'm searching for my question, but this idea is really fascinating because she did definitely have a challenging childhood, but is that a gift that she's been given so she can feel that? Talk to me about the empath thing, because that's really fascinating to me.
Yeah, well, you'll notice I said identify as,
Mm.
because they've diagnosed themselves as an empath, not necessarily because they have empathic abilities, but they are very empathic. So I think there's a division there. There are people that have skills and things that we can't understand or can't explain. And I don't want to make those people seem any less, because they're fantastic. But there are a lot of people that consider themselves empaths that maybe are just super sensitive to everything that's going on around them. And they know how people are feeling because they are an expert at reading the room. So they're empathic to a fault almost. And they might not qualify as the technical term for empath. They might not be able to read the spirit world or dive into the spirit realm, but they can definitely read a room in a minute, minutia of a second, and they know immediately what they're walking into because they've been trained to do that out of necessity.
Yeah, that is. I just watched a speaker on stage, and he was talking about how his dad was an alcoholic, and he knew before the key actually, as it was going into the door, what was about to walk in. And he said he was like 5, and he was talking about this at that age, to recognize, oh, dad's going to come in and beat the shit out of me, or dad's going to be warm and gentle and kind. And at 5 and 6 years old, I tried to put myself in his shoes to even understand. I have no chance because I didn't experience that as a 5, 6, 7-year-old child.
Yeah.
It's really remarkable that the body, as a human being, can really learn at such a young age to do that. And what I'm hearing is you can either continue bringing that in a good or perhaps a very destructive pattern for your own life moving forward. Is that kind of what you've seen in the work that you do?
Yeah, and people can turn into a people pleaser, right? So you read the room, you understand that there is danger of some sort. Your body, like the hair stands up on the back of your neck or whatever, and you're like, okay, there's danger. And even as a small child, you can pick up on that. I mean, immediately, because you don't have the cognitive skills, but your body knows. So you instantly pick up on some sort of danger or traumatic episode that's about to happen, and your body goes into fight or flight mode, and it's trying to figure out what to do next. Like when I was a child, I could hear my dad's truck coming down the street, and I would always be like, oh God, did I do my chores? Oh my, did I get everything done? And I would run through the house and be like, is the kitchen counter clean? Is the table cleaned off? And I would literally be running around because I wanted to make sure that I one more time checked to make sure all of my chores were done before he walked in the door, because I didn't know what kind of mood he was going to be in when he came home. And, you know, he wasn't necessarily going to come in and tear the house down, but I still had that sense of panic. And I can totally relate to that feeling that he had, because your body automatically knows what to do, even if your mind hasn't figured it out yet.
Yeah. And one of the things you talk about is breaking repetitive cycles and generational patterns. And the gentleman that was speaking was one of those people that 100% broke that cycle. I'm not sure how, because I don't know that piece of the story, right? He didn't share that part as to how he broke it, the work, as many people call it, that he did so he could be victorious, that he could take responsibility. What are you seeing? What do you wish, if you could reach out to people? I know your book, and we'll get into that. I'm really curious, but what do you wish everyone could hear right now? Because you dealt with some trauma as a child or even as an adult, and you see this pattern, especially generationally, because I don't like to believe that my fate is decided because of my DNA. I don't believe that to be the case. However, I know that there's a narrative out there that my mom was an alcoholic, my grandmother was an alcoholic, her dad was an alcoholic, and so I'm an alcoholic. I don't believe that, but I know it exists in this world. I know people do have that tendency that this is my destiny. What do you wish people would just hear to be like, no, you have a choice in the matter. These are some real resources and tools that you can use.
Well, first of all, every single human on this planet has value. And I know a lot of us don't see our own value, and they're out just searching for something to fill that void that they have inside of them through whatever means they can get, whether that means negative attention or through acting out, or, you know, doing whatever it is to get attention. That all comes from when we were children. And if we weren't necessarily provided with the right amount of nurturing or the right type of nurturing to suit our personal needs, which is no fault of the people who raised us because they weren't educated. So awareness is the first thing. And secondly, to realize that all humans have value, no matter what they've done, no matter how they've acted in the past. Everybody can recover, everybody can be found, everybody can reach that spot of worthiness inside of them, even if you feel like you are worth absolutely nothing. That is not true.
And I'm guessing that without reading the book, because I have not had the opportunity to yet, I will. Dragonfly Into the Light. What made you decide this is how I'm going to get this message out? This is how I want to reach so many people, to say you have value, regardless of what you have been told, regardless of the hardwires that have been really given to you at typically a very young age, before that long-term memory is even set. We have brought on so much, some good, often not so good. What made you decide, like, this is the book, I want to get it out, this is the platform that I'm going to use to really reach masses?
Well, I noticed that there were a lot of things flying around in the air about narcissists and toxic behavior and things like that. And I was kind of like looking into some of that, and it just felt too heavy to me. It was too negative. And my goal really is to help people see that there is hope and that they can heal no matter what sort of trauma they've experienced in their life. And being a victim and being stuck in that somebody did something to me mode isn't helpful. You have to find a way to step out of that in order to heal. So I wanted to create something that was captivating, that was a really good story that people would enjoy reading, that I could slide in some tips and education and awareness for people so that they could maybe realize some of the behaviors that they have might not be healthy behaviors. And yes, maybe they were exposed to some toxic behaviors or they were abused by someone, but what about your life can you take responsibility for and change in yourself so that you're no longer susceptible to that sort of treatment, so that you no longer allow yourself to be sucked into those sorts of vacuums where you're no longer in control of how you feel or what you do. So I really wanted to make it a hero story more than a victim story. Not that the person in the book is a hero, but it more of a positive spin on things instead of that heavy negative spin.
And what has been your favorite part of this journey with the book? Because I have to imagine, when people reach out and they say, oh my God, when I read this, it just reached me in a way that no one has done before. You literally changed my life because this section of the story or the overall book. I will say, as an author, and it is one of those really humbling and yet fulfilling things that you get, whether you meant for that when you started it or not. What's been your favorite part of this journey with the book and the work that you do?
Well, first of all, the best testimonial I could possibly ever get was from my own mom. She read the book, and on about chapter 6, she called me and said, I had to stop reading your book on chapter 6. And I was like, oh, what happened? She was like, I couldn't stop crying. She's like, but I'm going to finish it. And then about a week later, I saw her in person, and she said, you know what? You gave me the desire to change my life. She's like, I want to make my life better. I want to do that. And that was such a personal victory for me, because I was really worried of what she would think when she read my book, because it wasn't designed to be a personal attack on anyone at all, but she was the one I was concerned about. I didn't want her to feel like I was writing this book because she did something wrong, but she took it as a blessing, and I'm so glad she did. And then secondly, I've had several people that I went to high school with who read the book. And the message that I got back from them was, I read your book and I enjoyed it so much. I gave it to my teenage daughter because I wanted her to read it. Best possible compliment you could ever get.
And you did write this in fictional, correct? That I'm
Correct.
Yeah, and so it is interesting. I'm pausing for a moment because I'm trying to collect my thoughts on. I remember this when I was writing, because mine were nonfiction, and I did use real life examples that I felt like, hey, mom and dad, I want to make sure we're cool, that I love you. However, this has been my experience, and so it is. I understand that trepidation, that moment of like, I want to do good, yet could this create harm, where that's not the intention. I love that your mom said, oh my God, I want to change my life for the better. So she applied these, which was your intended audience? Was it really your mom? I mean, was the picture in your mind as you're writing this book, I can see mom, and she's this amazing human being that deserves more than perhaps what she believes? Was that kind of the idea, Annette, or was this just an amazing byproduct of what you wrote?
Honestly, I wasn't expecting anything for any one particular person. I just was kind of hoping that nobody felt attacked, which is why I made sure that it was fiction. And one of the benefits of doing it as fiction was that I could take like an event that maybe I remembered or saw happen or whatever, and then I could expand on it and tweak it and like really put in the parts of that particular event that I wanted people to get, and then create a learning moment from that. So it is 100% fiction. And I pulled from all areas of my life and other people's lives because I wanted to create experiences that everyone could relate to, but then also give them ideas on how they might do something different in their own life if they had experienced something like that.
That's amazing. I want to talk about some of the examples of generational patterns, getting back to this idea that I was abused, and it doesn't have to be abuse, so we're clear, but I'm giving an example. So just I was abused and then I end up abusing, and then now my kids are going to end up that way. Is that the idea of the generational pattern that we're looking to stop? Because obviously abuse in any form, whether it's verbal or physical, no human being deserves that, right? And that's typically insecurities or fears that are being obviously forecasted or projected onto that victim. What are some of the examples of generational patterns that you're seeing your work is really starting to stop, recognize, and really, make the world a better place ultimately? Because none of these kids, I'll say that, or human beings deserve this abuse. So can we talk about some of the examples of generational patterns you've seen?
Sure. So a lot of generational patterns, even though they are perceived as abusive or perceived as a negative event, a lot of times are not even intended to be abusive. So for example, first of all, I want to touch on one thing that's like a genetic DNA code that we all have. When we were nomads and we lived in a village and we were bad, we got ostracized from the community. And being ostracized meant certain death, because you weren't with your community. You could be attacked by a bear, you could starve to death, you could succumb to elements. That was all very real back in the day. We needed community to survive. That is still true for human beings today. But something equal to that for a small child, say mom and dad are having a serious conversation about something that is not for kid ears, and they tell Susie, go to your room, with no explanation. Susie could go to her room and then sit there and be like, what did I do wrong? Why am I in trouble? She's not in trouble in any way. It just wasn't explained to her. But because she doesn't know that, her mind starts to build a story about why she was ostracized to her room. And her immediate DNA pattern says, oh my God, you're going to die. You're going to die. So how many times have you sent your child to their room for some reason and they reacted in a way that was so fierce that you were just like, why are you so upset? That's because their genetic code said, you just got ostracized, you're going to die. They don't have any frame of reference for that. It wasn't intended to be abuse, but it was, because now they perceived it as a threat, and that could possibly stick with them long term. And then that starts with abandonment issues and all kinds of other things. But having these conversations with a lot of the women, I haven't really spoken with a lot of men. I think most women are more comfortable talking about stuff like this. But a lot of them are saying things to me like, if you're going to cry, go to your room. If this isn't done by the time I get home, you're going to be grounded for 6 months or whatever, like things that people say. Or how about the phrase, I want my wife to be barefoot and pregnant? Like, there are so many colloquialisms that we have said in the past that really are part of our society, and we don't even realize that we're doing that to someone. And depending on how that comment is perceived by the person who heard it, that's where the generational patterns develop. So if I told you as a 7-year-old, can it, kid, every time you cried, then you're going to grow up to be an adult who doesn't want to show emotions in front of other people. Does that explain it?
No, it does. And I can 100% look, I was taught boys don't cry. And the first chapter of my book is on vulnerability. So I finally realized that's horse shit, right? Like, boys do cry, and that's okay. I'm not saying go around and cry left and right, but I'm saying, look, if it feels like this is an appropriate time, then go. And there's no judgment or shame, or at least that's what I've tried to teach my boys. Like, look, let it out, because I'd much rather you let it out and stuff it down. Now it blows like a volcano into just really reckless behavior. So 100% that makes a ton of sense. My mind was going so many ways while you were talking, because my wife is of Asian descent, and often we talk about her upbringing versus mine, because my parents, in terms of verbal or physical abuse, it didn't exist, right? The most loving, kind, gentle human beings you can think of. My in-laws are also loving, but in such a vastly different way. And verbal abuse, or at least in my eyes, verbal abuse. And as my wife has become older, we start to realize, like, no, you don't call your kid fat, or you don't say the things that, it makes total sense, but that was not uncommon, right? And it's
No.
so culturally, there's a lot going on here. And again, I'm giving an example because my wife and I have, as we parent our kids, she comes from a way different lens and background, whereas verbally challenging or really getting on the kid, I'm not super comfortable with, because that wasn't my upbringing. And yet she also wants to break some of the patterns to not treat our kids that way. So it's really a fascinating subject that we have had to navigate, to say, look, I realize this is your background. I don't particularly care for the way you talk to our child right there. I don't see the value here. And so I guess it's a thought, it's a question, anything that you've seen where, because I know I'm not alone. I know there's other people that come from different backgrounds, and the thing that's helped us the most is communicating that, hey, how do we want to raise our kids together? And when I fall into these old patterns, help me recognize it.
Yeah, the cultural differences are huge. And I think that's, something that a lot of families, because the world is such a melting pot of people now. You see people from all sorts of different ethnic backgrounds are all living in the same place. So it's a lot more common for families to be intermingled with different belief systems and different values. And communication is going to be super key. And it's going to have to change regularly, because what's going to happen as your children hit different milestones in their lives, you could be triggered in a different way. Like something that a child does or doesn't do might immediately bring up some sort of a reaction that you weren't expecting, or that maybe your wife wasn't expecting, because of something that she experienced when she was a child. And she's going to have the cognizance, the awareness to be like, whoa, hold on a minute. I need to take 5 seconds and gain my composure, because I was going to say something that I don't want to say to my children. And, her parents weren't trying to be mean. That's just what they experienced while they were growing up. That's how you raise kids. So, in the Midwest, I mean, I can't tell you how many times people have said, just spank him, he'll be fine. Well, that doesn't work in most cases. Spanking a child is, as we're learning, is not the best way to get their attention. But that's the way we were raised in this part of the country where I'm from. That's just how you dealt with kids. If they stepped out of line, you whacked them. And, that doesn't really help the kid learn anything. They just learn not to stand close to you next time they do it.
Yeah. And this is really, we're getting into a fun conversation, which makes a lot of people uncomfortable. But look, parenting happens all the way around, everywhere. And I'm not saying I'm an expert on parenting. Look, my kids are pretty awesome, no doubt, but it's not necessarily due to parenting. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that when it comes to discipline, because you brought it up, the spanking thing, this is fascinating, because I grew up being spanked as well. Not often, but it happened. My wife definitely did. And have I spanked my kids? Yes. But it's been a really long time. What we have decided is, if you're going to discipline, whatever that is. So if I say you're grounded and no phone for a week, to hold to that. Don't give some idle threat and then go back on your word, because we're also creating a pattern. I think that's how it's felt for me as I watched the new helicopter parents, I'm using air quotes, is I'm never going to touch my child or discipline. It's like, oh, no, 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 no. They need discipline. So
Yeah.
what do you see in there? Because again, I grew up in Montana, similar Midwest values that way, but I believe in discipline, just not necessarily spanking, but actually seeing through whatever that discipline is that you've set forth. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, so first of all, I'm not a parenting expert either, but what my big thing is raising awareness, right? So I want people to be aware of their behavior. I want them to respond, not react. When you react out of emotion or being triggered, then you're not necessarily going to have the best reaction. So you want to think about what do you want from this particular situation? How would you like this to happen in the future? And we have to remember that not only are we raising our children to be disciplined in a certain way as a child, but we also want them to be able to be disciplined adults. And we don't want them to carry shame and guilt and fear into adulthood and pass that on to their children. So being able to have a conversation about punishment before and after, I think is super valuable. And then allowing the child to tell you how it made them feel. Because maybe there's a better way to discipline that one particular child than the same. All children are different. You can't treat them all exactly the same. I don't care how hard you try. They all have their own perceptions, and how it's perceived is the key here. If somebody perceives something as a threat, even if it wasn't meant to be a threat, then it's still a threat. And the only way to resolve that is to talk about it, to get communication.
Yeah, my audience is pretty familiar with the respond, not react, because we talk about it. I love that you said that. I tend to follow the Buddhist path, if you will, because meditation is a huge part of me working on respond, not react. However, early in this show, you brought up, you've seen this narcissistic behavior, and it seemed like you had such grace and patience with it, where those particular groups of individuals, it's really hard for me to act in that Buddhist way when they're narcissistic. What have you found, Annette, that's really helped you shape that? And maybe that's how it felt to me. It seemed like you gave it a lot more grace and understanding. And I want to feel that way, but man, that particular group of people is really challenging for me to say, you know what? It's cool. You're acting like an asshole, but yeah, I know you're a good guy down. You're not really. What have you found to help? Because I want to get better in this regard, because narcissists and JM, that's a tough one right there.
Yeah, I'm going to quote my daughter on this one. She's 37. She's a special education teacher. And her favorite thing to say to me is, behavior is communication. So whenever someone is behaving in a certain way, typically, even if they know it or not, they're trying to get a certain sort of reaction out of you. So if you're dealing with someone who's acting narcissistic in a manner that is narcissistic, and what you really want to do is just take a step back and be like, okay, I'm not really going to engage with this behavior because I'm not really sure what the value of this is. Like, where are we going here? Like, what's the outcome of this conversation? And it takes a lot of practice. But if someone's manipulating you, which is basically what people that are acting in a narcissistic way do, they're manipulating you. And some of it's deeply ingrained in their behavior, and it's based on shame and guilt, deep, deep shame and guilt. And sometimes they know what they're doing, but sometimes it's just their behavior. That's just the way they've been coded, and they behave in a certain way because that's how they get people to react. That's how they get what they want. They get people to either back down or agree to do things because they apply the right kind of pressure. And you just have to be able to step back and just be like, I'm not part of this. Like, you can talk if you want to, but I'm not going to agree, and I'm not going to join in. And you really have to learn to give yourself a lot of grace, and don't be intimidated by that. And you don't strike me as someone who's easily intimidated, but a lot of times people, that's the biggest thing that a narcissistic behavior does, is it intimidates other people. And in my situation, I just get exhausted by it. And finally, I'm just like, okay, whatever, I don't care anymore. And I think a lot of people can relate to that as well.
100%. I'm absolutely going to borrow that. Your daughter, that is a brilliant statement. Behavior is communication. The funny part is, as we were talking about narcissists, I just have to bust myself up for a second. I even went third person and said narcissist versus JM. I don't think I've ever done that. And so it's just fascinating that we're talking about narcissists and I use my own name. So ridiculous. God, that's so good. Behavior is communication. I have to ask you, or I'd like to ask you anyway, Dragonfly Into the Light. What made you land on that title? I'm always curious when authors write a book, how they choose that. And again, I haven't read it, so maybe there's something there that I'm missing, but I love the title. I'm just curious how you landed on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is a passion project for me. I actually started writing this book in like 2006 or something, kind of as therapy. And I just, whenever my life would get busy, I would put it aside and I wouldn't mess with it. And then during the pandemic, I had a lot of time on my hands, realized that I enjoyed writing and kind of decided to do it this particular way. And I don't claim to be an empath, but some of the things were just downloads, meditation, taking time to quietly think about what I wanted to do. I didn't really plan or like make a flow chart or anything. And a lot of it was just, it just like purged. It just came out of me. So, I mean, I can't really take 100% credit for it. I think it was just kind of, it just came through me.
No, I
Because
love it. I mean, Wayne Dyer says it all the time. It literally is a product of God, energy, universe, whatever it is. I want you to hear what she just said, you guys. It was therapy. She was literally writing. That's a form of therapy. I've talked about this so many countless times. I cannot tell you how huge that is to hear you say that, because I don't think I get as much clarity doing anything more than I do writing. And for you to do that and lead to this amazing book that's helping so many hundreds of thousands, maybe even more, maybe millions at this point of people. And it was really, like you said, a passion project that was therapy for yourself. I think that's amazing. Anything I didn't ask you that I should have known enough to ask you, open form, anything that you're like, JM, I gotta get this to the audience?
Nothing is coming to mind except for one thing, and this is not my quote. I read it somewhere. I don't know who the original quote person was, but a rising tide raises all ships. And my goal with writing this book is starting awareness one person at a time. And it's something I tell people is when you change yourself, you change the world around you. So if you can find it in yourself to be more aware, and if this book helps you to break some sort of generational pattern that's been happening in your family that you can now correct with your own children, or find a better way to deal with things with your own children, then the trickle down effect will affect all of the generations to come. So allow the rising tide to raise your ship and just be a part of, and one of my hashtags is join the evolution. We are all in the process of evolving. Let's do it in the best possible way. Join the evolution.
I can't say better than that. I mean, look, raising awareness, there's no judgment. There is no guilt or shame or anything that I'm hearing from this other than let's be aware of some of these things, some of these toxic behaviors that we may have that you may not even be aware of that are happening. Let's raise that awareness. Join the ever evolving. If you've arrived, you've lost. So I think that's beautifully put, Annette. I just want to thank you for coming on. I love your background. It is so like natural. It put me at ease and at home. You have the spice rack and the kitchen right behind you. And it just, I don't know. It's a beautiful, like natural, perfect background because of the subject matter, what we're talking about. We're literally talking about so many of these things are created in the home, and whether that was strategic or not, that's where you came from. And it really was authentic. And I just really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
if people wanted to find you, Annette, whether it's the naturopathic doctor work that you do or find the book, what's the best place for them to connect with you online and really see what you're all about?
Well, there's a few different ways. Of course, I'm on social. Instagram is it's Ask Dr. Annette. Facebook, you can look me up as Annette Copeland or Dr. Annette Copeland. And then I have a website that is currently being remodeled. So it's AnnetteCopeland.com. So hopefully if you go there and if for some reason it doesn't pop up, it's being remodeled. So it'll pop back up in a day or two. But I spend a lot of my time on Facebook. I have a group that's free for people to join. If you go to my Facebook page, there's a link right there on the homepage that you can join my group. And it's called Your Healthy Lifestyle with Ask Dr. Annette, where we talk about all things health, mind, body, spirit. You can't really fix a person without taking the whole person into consideration. So that's my goal.
Well, we will absolutely put all of that in the notes. You guys go check her out. Go buy the book. I mean, look, whether you like it or you don't, we have all dealt with trauma or experienced trauma. Maybe we didn't deal with it. Let me restate that. We've experienced it, and it does show up later in life unless we really do some work. And I think raising this awareness is 100% the way to go. Annette, thank you for coming. You're awesome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Told you guys, the show's all about helping you be happy, healthy, wealthy. And Annette 100% did that. There's so much to be gained from what she talked about, her book. So again, go check her out. Look at the website, join the Facebook. She said it's free. Go be happier. You deserve it. You absolutely do. And make sure to share this because again, as Annette didn't expect for her mom to read this and it to be this life-altering thing, maybe who you don't expect hears this show and it absolutely changes their perception, makes them realize how valuable and truly beautiful they are. I appreciate you guys. Cannot wait to talk to you again. Have a great one. Thank you so much for listening. If this content is delivering value to you, please make sure to subscribe, rate, and review us. That helps us build this community, and that is what we are all about. Building this community as big as we can, helping as many people as we can, and deliver as much value as possible. Be sure to head over to letsgowinpodcast.com for information on my coaching courses, and make sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Let's Go Win 365. Let's go win and transcend in life.
This is the Let's Go Win podcast with your host, J.M. Ryerson.